Um, we've talked a little bit this morning about how one of the key advantages of object-oriented programming in this way, is its reusability. It means that we can write some code and define something just once, but use it in lots of different places and even in completely different programs. And I can show you a little example of this right now. Uh, what we can do, if we were to store a .py file, we can save it, and that could represent what we call a module, which is basically just multiple class definitions and functions, and then we can import that module elsewhere, and we can either import the whole thing or we can just import bits from it. And you've effectively already been on the receiving end of this when you've imported things like the random library and the CSV library and things like that, where you're effectively importing bits of code that other people have written. And sometimes you import all of it, sometimes you import bits of it. Um, and as I mentioned earlier, you've seen lots and lots of examples of that. You've imported the random library, the CSV library. You're using the concept of a list, which is already built into Python. So here's an example of a piece of code that I've written. It's in your lecture examples, the file pen called wizardry.py. So what this piece of code does, it has an import statement to import the random library. Then it has a class definition, which defines what a Pencordian is, a member of our Pencord research team. And that has a constructor, which sets up a name that is passed in, and also this boolean here, defining whether or not they're a wizard, and that defaults to false when a new Pencordian is created. And Pencordians also have a couple methods, because there are only two things members of our team can do, and that is write models and tell jokes. And so we capture that in our class here for a write model method. And when we call the write model method, we pass in the type of model, and we simply print a message saying the name of this Pencordian is now writing this kind of model. And for the tell joke, we pass in a probability of success, and we randomly draw from a uniform distribution, see if it's less than that probability that's passed in. If it is, they told the joke and people loved it. Otherwise, the joke fell flat. So we've got a Pencordian that's got a couple of attributes, name and whether they're a wizard or not, and a couple of methods to write a model and to tell a joke. And outside of that, in this .py file, so outside of the class definition, I've also just got this standalone function here. It doesn't belong to a class, it's just a standalone function. And this function just turns someone into a wizard. And it's called turn into a wizard, that's nice and self-explanatory. And all it requires is a subject to be passed to it when it's called. And that subject needs to be an object that has a name, attribute, and an is a wizard boolean attribute. And as long as that's the case, you can call the turn into a wizard method on that object. And what the method will do is it'll set that particular subject's is a wizard boolean to true, and it'll print a message saying that their name, whatever that is now a wizard. So we've got a class definition here and a standalone function that turns people into wizards. Now, in the same directory, I can also create a separate .py file. So this is in your lecture examples, import code 1.py. And this is a completely separate piece of code. Again, I'm going to import the random library, but I'm also, in this piece of code, going to import Pencord Wizardry. And remember, Pencord Wizardry is the name of this file over here. So I can just import that, and if you're just doing this locally, you can, as long as it's in the same directory, you can just call the name of whatever it is that you've called your file without the .py bit, and it'll import basically all of the code from that file. So now, within this piece of code, within this .py file, I've got access to what a Pencordian is, that class definition, as well as this standalone function here, so I can turn people into wizards in this particular piece of code as well. So let's see how that works. So in this code, I've set up a list of Pencordian names, and I'm just going to randomly select 3 people from that list. I'm using the sample method from the random library. Sample basically selects elements without replacement. In other words, they can't be picked again. Just as a note, if you want to pick things from a list where you can pick the same thing multiple times, you can use random.choices, which does the same thing but allows replacement. So I'm going to pick 3 names from this list of Pencordians, list of Pencordian names, sorry. Then I'm going to set up a blank list, an empty list, that will store some Pencordian objects. Okay, and I'm then going to create some Pencordian objects with the names that I've selected, the 3 names I've selected here, and I'm going to create those as Pencordian objects. Now remember, I have not defined what a Pencordian is in this piece of code. All I've done is I've imported this piece of code, and that piece of code has the definition of what a Pencordian is, but I haven't had to repeat it here. I haven't had to redefine my class Pencordian. So here in this list, I'm basically just going through the list of 3 names that I've randomly chosen, and for each of those, I'm going to onto this empty list here, or empty at the start, I'm going to append, and I'm going to call, the thing I'm going to add to this list is a new Pencordian, which I can access by saying pencordwizardry.pencordian, because that says, give me the Pencord Wizardry module that I've imported here, so I can refer to it, and give me the class definition for a Pencordian, this. So that's the thing it's pulling in. And remember, in our constructor here, we said that we need to pass in a name when we create a new Pencordian, and so I pass in the name. So it'll loop through the 3 list of the 3 randomly selected names that I got from this list. It'll create a new Pencordian with that name, and it'll do that by using the definition from this piece of code over here, and it'll add that object to this list here. Remember, lists can store objects. In fact, you've been storing objects all along, you just didn't know it. This list here is a list of objects. It just happens to be a list of string objects, and you specify what the values are. But here we've got a list of Pencordians. We now have such a thing as a Pencordian object in our code because we've created it. Just as we've got things like string objects and list objects, we've now got a Pencordian object. And then, just to really prove this point, I can call the methods that live within a Pencordian. Again, I haven't defined what a Pencordian is in this code. I've just imported it from over here. And so from my list of new Pencordian objects, I can go through each one and tell it to write a model, call the method that lives within that Pencordian object. And I can tell it to tell a joke. Now, you'll see an example here of an output. So first we had Kerry's now writing a discrete event simulation model. She attempted a joke, fell flat. Sammy's writing a discrete event simulation model, also attempted a joke, fell flat. Dan is now writing a DS model, attempted a joke, and people loved it. I won't say how many times I went through randomly with a 10% chance of that happening to get that. Needless to say, it was a lot. Now, that's an example of where I've imported all of the things from Pencord Wizardry. So in this example, I said, give me everything in Pencord Wizardry. In other words, give me a class definition of the Pencordian, give me any standalone functions that turn into a wizard thing here. But you'll also note that I imported everything there, but I didn't use everything. I used the definition of what a Pencordian was, but I didn't use this turn into a wizard thing. And it might be that in another piece of code, I need to use this turn into a wizard method because it's quite useful for what I need. But I don't need anything to do with Pencordians. I don't need that class definition. So what I could do is import, as I did before, import Pencord Wizardry. But there might be lots and lots of stuff in there that I don't actually need, and that's quite inefficient. So a better way to do it would be just to import the thing or things you need. And so that's what I'm doing here. And again, you've seen examples of this already in some of the code that we've looked at, where we can say from this, import this, and you can also list things out as well, so you can separate them with commas. But in this case, I just want to import turn into a wizard, which is this method here, or this function here. So now in this piece of code, this is import code 2.py, I haven't defined the function turn into a wizard. Instead, I've imported it. So I can use, it now knows what that function is because it's grabbed it from this piece of code over here. And I'm going to create in this piece of code my own new class called HSMA. And basically this just has a simple constructor that sets up a name and whether they're a wizard or not. And I'm going to create a new HSMA object called Gandalf. And I'm going to turn Gandalf into a wizard by using the turn into a wizard function that I imported from pen called Wizardry. And so despite not having defined what turn into a wizard is in this piece of code, because I've imported it, I've already defined it over here in a completely separate code file, so I can use it. I don't have to write it again. And so that really emphasizes the fact that you can use this stuff in other things. And you, as you get through your sort of coding journeys, you'll find things that you'll think, actually, that would be really useful generally. And so you can import, write things that you can then import into other pieces of code. And in fact, you can even, if you find stuff that you think would be generally useful to the community, you can go out and you can upload it to repositories and make it available and all that kind of stuff. But certainly for the kinds of things you'll be doing, you may find it useful to do this kind of thing. In fact, the example of the group who said about creating a class for appointments, that could be really useful. Having an appointment class might be useful for other stuff as well. And so you create that class and use it elsewhere.